Hello and welcome to Torah portion Pinchas. This Torah portion, as I was putting it together, I saw this is actually quite a short Torah portion. So I'm going to focus on one thing, which is something that I looked at a couple of years ago, but it's something that is essential to look at for people who are new to keeping the Torah, especially men that are new to keeping Torah. And I want to kind of dispel some myths that you find in Christianity and disappointingly actually in the people who have begun to follow Torah, the Torah movement, Torah keepers, whatever you want to call them, recently. Kind of some of the old lies of the past have been recirculated and people have begun to follow the wisdom of the world rather than what the scriptures actually say. And there's a bunch of scriptures from Paul's letters which I can see why they confuse people. I understand why they confuse people. I don't understand why they would think that Paul had the authority to say that what was previously in Scripture was not to be followed anymore. But I do understand why they read his letters, sections of them, to say what they think that they say. Now, as we'll see, they don't actually say that. But I can understand why people would think that that's what they were saying. We're missing a lot of historical context. We're also presented with translations that come from people who have a certain doctrine. I've spoken previously about how the translation that we get will be dependent upon the doctrine of the translator. If the translator thinks a certain way, then that will be reflected in how they translate certain texts. So we'll look at that issue, of course, that being the issue of circumcision. We'll look at that in the first couple of parts, and then in the last part we'll cover kind of the rest of the text of the Torah portion. We'll see a census of Israel. We'll see that the land is to be divided up by lot. And we'll see the daughters of Zelophehad when they come and they say, we're going to lose our inheritance. So we'll see that issue. And finally, we'll see Joshua or Yahushua being appointed as leader in Moshe's place when Moshe is to die. So that will be the third part. Son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, has turned back my wrath from the children of Israel, because he was zealous with my zeal, he says, in their midst. And he says, so that I did not consume the children of Israel in my zeal. So he exhibits Yehovah's zeal. Therefore say, I am giving him my covenant of shalom. And it shall be to him and to his seed after him a covenant of an everlasting priesthood. So it's an everlasting covenant because he was zealous for his Elohim and made atonement. As we've seen recently, making atonement is something that we read of in Psalm 78, when Yehovah said he killed all of the wicked people, and that made atonement for his dwelling place. Here we see that what Pinhas did was he made atonement also for the defilement that was happening all around Yehovah's dwelling place. But Pinhas isn't the only person in Scripture with whom an everlasting covenant is made, and a covenant based upon zealousness. There's also a covenant to which we are a party, made with Abraham. It says of Abraham, and he believed in Yehovah, and he reckoned it to him for righteousness. So it was reckoned to Abraham as righteousness that he believed what Yehovah said, just as it is for us. That promise is also given to us. In Galatians 3:29, it tells us, if you are of Messiah, then you are seed of Abraham and heirs according to the promise. So what is promised to Abraham, or what was promised to Abraham, what is promised to Abraham, I suppose, is also promised to us. In Genesis 17, we see something which is important for us to bear in mind. If we are going to say, well, we are Abraham's seed, and the promises are given to us, the inheritance will be given to us as heirs of that promise, then we need to see what was required of Abraham and what is required of all of his seed after him, which would include us. Verse 1 says, and it came to be when Abraham was 99 years old, that Yehovah appeared to Abraham and said to him, I am El Shaddai, walk before me and be perfect. And I give my covenant between me and you, and shall greatly increase you. So Abraham fell on his face, and Elohim spoke with him, saying, as for me, look, my covenant is with you, and you shall become a father of many nations. And no longer is your name called Abraham, but your name shall be Abraham, because I shall make you a father of many nations. And I shall make you bear fruit exceedingly, and make nations of you, and kings shall come from you. And I shall establish my covenant between me and you, and your seed after you in their generations. Again, this is an everlasting covenant, to be Elohim to you and your seed after you. And I shall give to you and your seed after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan as an everlasting possession, and I shall be their Elohim. And Elohim said to Abraham, as for you, guard my covenant, or cherish my covenant, treasure my covenant, keep my covenant. The word is shamar. You and your seed after you throughout their generations. That word shamar, we see Adam is told to shamar the garden, to keep the garden, tend to the garden. So that's what Abraham is being told here. Guard my covenant. This is my covenant. Okay, this is my covenant. If we have faith accounted to us as righteousness and we are seed of Abraham, this is the covenant to which we are party also, which you guard between me and you and your seed, as we've just seen, that's us, after you. Every male child among you is to be circumcised. Okay, the word is mul, and that is a word which means to cut. You could translate this as every male child among you is to be cut. The translators have said circumcised because that is the nature of this cutting. And you shall namal the flesh of your foreskin. Namal is another word which means to cut off. You shall cut off the flesh of your foreskin. It is a word which is synonymous with mul, the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall become a sign of the covenant between me and you. And a son of 8 days is circumcised by you. Every male child in your generations, he who is born in your house or bought with silver from any foreigner who is not your seed. So this we see being codified in Torah. A son of 8 days is circumcised by you. When Yehovah gives his Torah, at Mount Sinai, we see him giving this instruction that this should be done going forward. And it's not just when somebody is eight days old rather. And if you've missed that, then that's it. You're not to become circumcised. As we read at the beginning of Genesis 17, Avram, as he was at the time, was 99 years old when he took the sign of the covenant in his flesh. So he who was born in your house, or he who is bought with silver. Okay, so somebody who was bought with silver was older than 8 days old. But as soon as they're taken into Abraham's house, then they are circumcised. Charlie covered in Torah portion Ki Titzah how we are bought with silver when the head tax, the half shekel, the becker of silver was paid for us. We are taken into Abraham's household then, and it is required of us that we would be circumcised. Verse 13 says, he who was born in your house and he who was bought with your silver has to be circumcised. It's absolutely plain, very clear what is written here. So shall my covenant be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. So this is true today as it was then. If you want Yahovah's covenant to be in your flesh, and you want to be counted as one of Abraham's household, this is what is required of you. Paul does not possess the authority to say that this is null and void. It's funny that people actually take him saying that from a passage where he says, look, if a man's covenant can't be annulled, then a covenant made by Yahovah with Abraham certainly cannot be annulled. But as I said at the beginning, people misunderstand what it is that Paul is actually saying. But even if he was saying that, he doesn't possess the authority to contradict Scripture. So at this point, you may well be thinking this. Maybe this is news to you. Maybe you've considered circumcision, but you've thought, well, we don't have to do that anymore. That is very much the same sort of thinking which says that the temple is done away with, but then goes to people in the Christian church and says, well, no, actually, not one jot or tittle of Torah has been done away with. Nothing. It all stands, apart from the temple and apart from circumcision, and maybe people say apart from wearing tzitzit, or people don't really have what would be called logical consistency. What they have rather is kind of a collection of beliefs in their head that they hold, and that's what they obey. Now, I mentioned the book of Galatians, and I've put this up recently, but I would recommend to you these two playlists. These are some of the playlists on the channel. I would recommend going to check them out if you've not seen them. But the Romans commentary and the Galatians commentary, what they actually are, I went on Now You See TV and I did a verse-by-verse commentary on Romans and on Galatians. The last one in Galatians, although we did it live, didn't process onto YouTube server and save. So the last one doesn't actually exist on the internet anymore. It was just done live. But if you watch the first 5 parts, I would say that it would actually be to your benefit to read Galatians 6 then with the understanding of the first 5 chapters and interpret it for yourself, because that will help you with interpreting what Paul writes and where those little opportunities to misunderstand what he's actually saying when he says, no flesh is saved by the Torah. People misunderstand that to mean, well, if we're not saved by the Torah, then we won't keep the Torah. It's not what Paul is saying. He's just saying, listen, it's your faith which is accounted to you as righteousness, as it was to Abraham. It's not the fact that you've kept the Torah perfectly. But one of the verses or passages from the book of Galatians that people misunderstand about circumcision is Galatians 5:2-4, which says, "See, I shall say to you, if you become circumcised, Messiah shall be of no use to you." So obviously this is something which is easy to misunderstand. The error that people make with Paul's letters are they read them like the book of Proverbs. They read them like you can just take one verse out of them and that will give you some kind of wisdom or knowledge. So people say, I'm not going to become circumcised because I don't want Messiah to be of no use to me. What Paul actually is referring to is revealed as we continue to read in verse 4. Verse 3 says, "And I witness again to every man being circumcised that he is a debtor to do the entire Torah." So what Paul is saying is, listen, if you become circumcised in order to be saved, then Messiah is of no use to you because you've already been declared righteous by your works. If you're circumcised and you keep all of the Torah, but he says, if you become circumcised in order to become saved, which as we will see as we go through was the debate of the day as is revealed in the scriptures. If you do that, then you have become a debtor to do all of the Torah to be saved. And since all of us have fallen short of the esteem or the glory of Elohim, none of us have done perfectly, then it's not a good way to look for your salvation from the works of the Torah. And Paul elucidates this in verse 4. He says, you who are justified by Torah, you have fallen from grace. So don't seek to be justified by Torah. Being circumcised is not about being justified before God, being declared right. That word, justified, is for Yehovah to declare you right. We are declared right by faith, even though we have not walked in righteousness. We have the opportunity to repent, and Yehovah give us grace for our sins and for us to be justified by grace. So he's not saying don't become circumcised. He's saying don't try to be justified by your circumcision. Don't try to be justified by, if you're going to be justified by circumcision, then you are a debtor to do the entire Torah for your justification. If that's how you're going to seek it, you're going to have done all of the Torah perfectly. So is he saying circumcision is not for today? No. In fact, in the book of Galatians, in this same chapter, 7 verses after this, in verse 11, we will see that Paul tells us that he preaches circumcision, that he proclaims circumcision, as if to qualify what he has already said. What he's already said is quite clear if you read what he says carefully. But just in case you think that Paul preaches against circumcision, and that was certainly something that was that he was accused of. We see that in Acts 21 when he goes up to the temple to give to have 4 men cleansed from the Nazirite vow by giving animal sacrifice. We see that he is accused of teaching against circumcision. Paul says, and I, brothers, if I still proclaim circumcision, why am I still persecuted? because this was exactly the accusation against him, that he taught against circumcision. But he says, look, I still preach circumcision. I just preach that you can't be saved, or you can't be declared right. You can't be justified by circumcision, which of course we can't. It's like somebody saying of me, JP teaches against circumcision, even though I am advocating for circumcision right now. People saying, no, look, JP says that you, if you look to circumcision for justification, Messiah is of no use to you. Therefore, he teaches against circumcision. It wouldn't make sense now, and it didn't make sense then. The problem really, I think, is that people are very literally and figuratively attached to their foreskins. They don't want to undergo a procedure, and there's various things which are taught about circumcision according to the wisdom of the world that people become fearful of. And I think this is why people look for a reason not to become circumcised, even though Yehovah was very clear, you and your seed after you, which it's made very clear by Paul that we are his seed, you and your seed after you must have your foreskins removed. It couldn't be any clearer, and yet people want to find a reason in the Bible, as if the Bible contradicts itself, why things have changed now. And this is particularly logically inconsistent for Torah keepers to tell other people, you know, we keep all of the Torah apart from the temple, apart from circumcision, apart from tzitzit, apart from whatever else we want to justify. I'm sure there are Torah keepers out there who will say that it's okay to eat unclean animals because of this, that, and the other. It's hypocrisy. Acts 15, 1-5 shows us what the problem was. So certain men came down from Yehudah who were teaching the brothers. What were they teaching them? Unless you are circumcised according to the practice of Moshe, you are unable to be saved. In other words, you have to be declared right by circumcision. This is what Paul is arguing against. He says, no, if you're going to be justified by circumcision, then you have to be justified by your perfect keeping of all of the Torah, which no one has done. So if you're going to be justified by the law, read what he says, you who are justified by the law, which is what these men were teaching that you must be, you have fallen from grace. So they were saying you have to be circumcised according to the practice of Moshe to be saved. So when Shaul and Barnabas, Paul and Barnabas, had no small dissension and dispute with them, they disagreed with what they were saying, as we can see from what Paul writes. They arranged for Shaul and Barnabas and certain others of them to go up to Jerusalem. Okay, remember that they're going to Jerusalem about this. They were going to the apostles and elders about this question. So they knew that this was being taught, and they knew what the truth of it was. They knew that if you were justified by your circumcision, that you had to do all of the Torah to be justified. And that simply wasn't true. We're justified by Messiah. If you're going to get your justification from somewhere else, then Messiah is of no use to you. Why do you need Messiah if you're justified by having kept the Torah perfectly and by having been circumcised? So they went up to speak to the apostles and elders. So being sent on their way by the assembly, they passed through Phoenicia and Shomron, that's Samaria, relating the conversion of the Gentiles. Remember this, they're relating the conversion of the Gentiles. And they were causing great joy to all the brothers. And having arrived in Jerusalem, they were received by the assembly and the apostles and the elders. And they reported all that Elohim had done with them. And we'll see this written of elsewhere. So remember, when they arrived in Jerusalem, they reported all that Elohim had done with them to the Gentiles. And some of the believers who belonged to the sect of the Pharisees rose up saying, "It is necessary to circumcise them and command them to keep the Torah of Moshe." And we're going to see at the end of Acts 15, which we'll look at in a little bit, what the decision of the elders and the apostles was. Do they have to be circumcised and keep the Torah of Moshe to be justified? Well, we'll see what their answer is. Galatians 2, 1-5 says, "Then after 14 years, I again went up to Jerusalem with Barnabas." This is the trip that we've just learnt of in Acts 15, taking Titus along too. Remember, Titus is with them because we're going to read something about Titus and circumcision later on. "And I went up by revelation and laid before them that good news which I proclaim among the Gentiles, but separately to those who were esteemed, lest somehow I run or had run in vain. But not even Titus, who was with me, though a Greek, was compelled to be circumcised." Okay, so they're going up to Jerusalem. What they're going up to Jerusalem in order to find out from the apostles and elders whether or not you are to be circumcised in order to be justified, in order to be saved. So what Paul is saying here is, Titus, though a Greek, was not compelled to be circumcised. They were going up about this issue. Titus wasn't compelled to be circumcised. Verse 4 says, "But as for the false brothers," what are they? They're false brothers, sneakingly brought in, who sneaked in to spy out our freedom which we have in Messiah Yeshua in order to enslave us. "To these we did not yield in subjection." Okay, just like Titus, not even Titus was compelled to be circumcised. Not that Titus was never circumcised, just that when they went up about this issue, he wasn't compelled. Not even for an hour, so that the truth of the good news remains with you. In Exodus 12, verse 48, we read this, "When a stranger sojourns with you and shall perform the Passover to Yehovah, let all his males be circumcised, and then let him come near and perform it, and he shall be as a native of the land, but let no uncircumcised eat of it." So even back in Exodus 12, okay, we're told that they must be circumcised to eat the Passover meal. This is the first time that the children of Israel were circumcised for this Passover meal. Okay, well, that will become relevant as we go on. Let no uncircumcised eat of it. So this idea that the stranger, that the Gentile would become circumcised to be a part of Israel, is nothing new. Okay, you're not saved by circumcision, but one would become circumcised, and we'll see this more as we go out. No uncircumcised, the word is arel here. This word means having foreskin. We're going to get on as we go through this. to the lie that to become circumcised means to have part of your foreskin removed. Just the tip is the lie which has become prevalent. We will see that this lie was believed in the past, and it has become prevalent now. But what circumcision means and what uncircumcision means is all to do with the cutting off of the foreskin. As we saw, the Greek word was peritemno, to cut around the perimeter. Arel, uncircumcised, means to have a foreskin. It doesn't mean to have the tip of a foreskin. It means to have the whole foreskin. And all of the words surrounding circumcision, as we will see as we go through, reveal to us that it is the removal of the foreskin. It says here, properly exposed, which is the glands which is exposed. That's what is exposed. If you just have the tip of your foreskin removed, that is not to be exposed. And as we will see, to have the glands of the penis exposed was something that was a faux pas in Greek and Roman civilization. It was something which very much would set you apart, and it's something that the Greeks and the Romans really had no time for. Hebrews 9:13-14 says, if the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of a heifer sprinkling the defiled sets apart for the cleansing of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Messiah, who through the everlasting Spirit cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living Elohim? The conscience is in the heart. So we'll get onto the idea of the circumcision of the heart rather than the circumcision of the flesh as we progress through this. But I want you to realize at this point that being circumcised in the flesh is required, as is being circumcised in the heart. Just as if we had Yehovah dwelling in our midst, it would be necessary for us to cleanse our flesh at the temple, as well as have a clean conscience before Elohim. Acts 15:19-21 says, therefore I judge that we should not trouble those from among the Gentiles who are turning to Elohim. So this, when Paul and Barnabas and Titus go up to Jerusalem to the apostles and elders about the question of whether or not they should be telling the Gentiles, in order to be declared right, in order to be saved, you must be circumcised and you must keep the Torah of Moshe, all of it. This is the proclamation that was made about that by the apostles and elders, by James, in fact, or Yaakov. Therefore, I judge that we should not trouble those from among the Gentiles who are turning to Elohim, but that we write to them to abstain from the defilements of idols, and from fornication, and from what is strangled, and from blood. For from ancient generations, Moses has in every city those proclaiming him, being read in the congregations every Sabbath. So their answer was, no, they're not to be declared right by circumcision and by following all of the Torah. What you should do is teach them 4 things from the Torah. Why? The reason is explicitly given. Because Moshe is preached in every congregation on the Sabbath day. So they will learn Moses as they go on. So it's not necessary to, as soon as you look to Yehovah for justification, for him to give you grace for you to be saved, it's not necessary to do everything in the scriptures at that point. The way that it works is, as you learn about it, then you start doing it. That's what faith in the word is. We're not saved by the works of Torah. We're saved by faith. So as we come across new things, it might be circumcision, it might be wearing teeth, it might be whatever. Maybe you don't know that you're not to eat unclean animals. But when you learn that that's what the word says, because you believe the word, that's what you do. And you're saved by your belief, not by the works of Torah. But belief is accompanied by those works, otherwise it is dead. You can't just say, I believe in the Bible. Do you do what the Bible says? Oh no, I don't do what it says, but I do believe that it's true. Those things don't work. The scriptures teach us through contrast all the way through that unbelief is disobedience and obedience is belief. Acts 16, 1-3 says, and he came to Derbe and Lystra, and see, a certain disciple was there named Timothy, the son of a certain Jewish woman who believed, but his father was Greek, who was well spoken of by the brothers who were at Lystra and Iconium. Shaul wished to have this one go with him. What did he do? He took him and he circumcised him because of the Jews who were in those places, for they all knew that his father was a Greek. So he goes and he circumcises this person to show the Jews. They knew his father was Greek, but Paul goes and circumcises him. So, as I said before, not only does he preach circumcision, he also performs circumcision. Just like we see him going to the temple to show the Jews that he keeps the Torah. Here he shows the Jews that he is circumcising even those who are Gentiles. And in this culture, it was the paternal line which was important, not the maternal line. Something which has been kind of profaned in modern Judaism, where they've turned to the maternal line. But regardless, it was always the paternal line that was important. So his father was a Greek. He takes him to show the Jews and he circumcises him. So is Paul against circumcision? Certainly not. If he was saying circumcision would render Messiah useless, why would he go and circumcise Timothy? In 1 Corinthians 7:18, I want you to notice the Greek words. Let him not become epispato, anyone called, akrobustia. So we see that the word for circumcised is the same, because that's the same thing being discussed. But the word for uncircumcised is different. So it's not like if he's circumcised, then become uncircumcised. If he's uncircumcised, then become circumcised. It's if he's circumcised, don't let him become epispato. If he is uncircumcised, that's the actual word for uncircumcised in Greek, akrobustia, let him not become circumcised. And we'll see exactly what that's talking about. But we remember what the debate is of the time, and then this will help us to understand this verse when we get to it. But first of all, let's look at the word epispato. Okay, epispato. Now, what I was saying about translation, coming from the doctrine of the translators, is seen nowhere to be more true than in the translation of this word. This word is used, as you can see here, it is used once as in all of the text of the scriptures to mean become circumcised. It only appears once in the scriptures. We can see it says outline of biblical usage, which is basically how it's used in translation. It says here, to draw on, let him not draw on his foreskin. And we'll see where that idea comes from. It says here, to efface the mark of circumcision by recovering with the foreskin, or to become uncircumcised. But as I say, this word is only used once in all of Scripture. It's not a common word at all. And it's because of this doctrine which is so pervasive and almost kind of the drawing upon a practice that did happen with Jewish men and saying that is what it means when epispato is used. Spato, epi is just a preposition. Spato means to draw, literally to draw one's sword. A verb, to draw or to draw out. So there was this practice of the drawing out of the skin of the penis after circumcision, as we'll see, a particularly brutal practice where after circumcision, after the removal of the foreskin, the skin on the actual penis was cut and then pulled over the foreskin in a time before anesthetic. Particularly, that would be a brutal operation. But the translators, what they're doing is they're confusing a historical practice with what the meaning of this word actually is. And we'll see what the meaning of this word should be in the context of this passage, in the context of this debate which was happening at the time. But just to illustrate this to you, I want to show you an entry in Thayer's Greek lexicon. Thayer was a Christian, and he had a Christian doctrine about circumcision being done away with, essentially. So he says, there have been Jews who, in order to conceal from heathen persecutors or scoffers the external sign of their nationality, sought artificially to compel nature to reproduce the prepuce, the foreskin, by extending or drawing forward with an iron instrument the remnant of it still left. This is, as I say, a confusion about an actual practice which did happen. They say the remainder of the foreskin, which is still left, wasn't quite the practice. We look to historical sources to see what this practice was. It was actually the skin on the shaft of the penis, which would be cut around and then drawn forward over the foreskin. But we see here that he gives several sources from this. He says from the days of Antiochus Epiphanes down, and he says Maccabees 1:15 gives us evidence of this. He says in Josephus Antiquities, book 12, chapter 5, there have been Jews who, in order to conceal from the heathen persecutors. So he gets this idea that this is what this word epispato means, not from a definition of the word, but from confusing the idea of drawing with a historical practice that he has sources for. So I want to look at a couple of the sources that he quotes to show you. None of them say epispato is this practice. All they do is they tell us about this practice. So he mentions Josephus, book 12, chapter 5, part 1. The sons of Tobias took the part of Menelaus. But the greater part of the people assisted Jason. And by that means, Menelaus and the sons of Tobias were distressed and referred to Antiochus and informed him that they were desirous to leave the laws of their country and the Jewish way of living according to them, and to follow the king's laws and the Grecian way of living, the Greek way of living. Wherefore they desired his permission to build them a gymnasium at Jerusalem, and when he had given them leave, they also hid the circumcision of their genitals, that even when they were naked, they might appear to be Greeks. So they hid their circumcision. Accordingly, they left off all the customs that belonged to their own country and imitated the practice of other nations. And this is actually what we find people doing today. People who are ashamed of circumcision. They want to follow the wisdom of the world rather than what the scriptures actually say. The building of a gymnasium was a big thing at the time in the Roman baths and Greek gymnasiums. This is where men would be naked, where their penises would be visible. And as I mentioned before, the exposing of the glands of the penis was looked down upon, was scorned in Greek and Roman society. So these people, they wanted to hide the fact that they were circumcised. But what you'll notice is this is the source for which Thayer, from which Thayer takes the idea that this is what epispato means. The word epispato is not used in this passage. It is a leap that he is taking there to say this drawing was this practice. This practice did exist, but the idea that that's what epispato says, there is no evidence for that beyond just the translators saying that that is how it should be translated. In Maccabees 1:14-15a, which is what he gave as his source, it says, and they built a gymnasium in Jerusalem according to the custom of the Greeks, the Grecian way, as Josephus puts it. And they made for themselves foreskins, which is this practice, this several practices which were similar and were designed to hide circumcision, but this actual practice is not what epispato refers to. Now there is another confusion in this. The practice itself was called epispasm. So to somebody who is not a Greek speaker, epispasm and epispato sound the same. But to confuse words that sound the same is foolishness. It would be akin to if somebody said that they wanted you to circumscribe your penis, which would mean to draw around the circumference of your penis, and you confuse that to be circumcise your penis, that would be a grave error, even though the words actually sound very similar. So what I want you to take away from this is that Thayer and the other translators, they don't have any evidence that epispato refers to this practice. The only thing that they can do is point to the fact that this practice existed and saying, well, this must be what the spato of epispato, the drawing, refers to. We read from a paper called 2007, or rather in the University of Mississippi Undergraduate Research Volume 2 article 14/1/2017. The article is called Reverse Circumcision in Hellenistic Judaism. And what Hellenistic Judaism is, Hellenistic refers to that which is Greek. So it's Judaism that, as we read about, Jews that were going after the Greek way of doing things. That's what it is for something to be Hellenistic, referring to Helen. Okay, so how does a person make for oneself a foreskin? There are two procedures in the ancient world designed to undo circumcision. Actually, there are more, but for our purposes here, to understand infibulation and epispasm is sufficient. Infibulation, according to Census, so this is the source for this, he was a first century medical author, involved drawing the skin around the penis forward to cover the glands and fastening it with a fibula or twine. Epispasm, which is often called the Cadillac of corrective surgeries, is the most effective procedure known to undo circumcision. Epispasm was a challenging operation. I will say it certainly was. The surgeon would cut the skin on the shaft of the penis, pull it forward to cover the glands, and dress it carefully so that the skin would attach itself to the glands, leaving a foreskin. Bear in mind that this operation was practiced without anesthesia, though Celsus promises that the operation was not so very painful. There simply is not enough data to state whether 1 Maccabees refers to infibulation or epispasm. It is possible that Hellenistic Jews were practicing both infibulation and epispasm. But the contention that epispao is this practice is not evidenced anywhere. We'll get on to what epispao, what that drawing actually refers to at the end of this part shortly. Okay, we read this. I was looking for evidence of epispao, and I came across this, which is actually literary evidence for epispasm. Says the great Roman medical textbooks record treatments designed to lengthen defectively short foreskins. Again, in that culture, to have a short foreskin which would reveal the glands was something which was looked down upon. So people, if they had defectively short foreskins, in other words, abnormally short foreskins, they would seek to stretch it out and to pin it. The contention of Thayer and the other translators is that must be what epispao is referring to, this kind of drawing out, or epispasm, which was cutting the skin of the penis and drawing it to create a new foreskin. But as I say, there is no evidence that that is what epispao actually means. So he says, Dioscorides, a physician to Nero's troops, prescribed the herb thapsia to help restore the foreskin by causing it to swell. So this was another practice, and he gives the reference there if you want to look up about this practice. He expressly says this method will not avail for those who have been circumcised. Cyronius, who practiced during the reigns of Trajan and Hadrian, gives the following prescription for one who is born with a short foreskin. So we see that the methods for those with a short foreskin will not avail somebody who has been circumcised. Why? Because circumcision is the removal of the whole foreskin, not just the tip. If that was true, then these medical procedures would work for those who had just had the tip removed. But as we see here, have historical evidence for them saying those who were circumcised, these procedures will not work for them. Okay, so if we look at spasmos, the word from which epispasm is derived, we see that it has nothing to do with drawing, but everything to do with spasming and convulsing. So this word epispasm, if you imagine what it would be like for you to have the skin on the shaft of your penis cut without anesthetic and then pulled forward to create a new foreskin, makes sense why the word has to do with spasming and convulsing in pain. Okay, nothing to do with spao, which is to draw something forward. So 1 Corinthians 7 verse 18 makes more sense when we translate epispao to mean what the word actually means. Was anyone called while circumcised? Let him not be drawn. Was anyone called while uncircumcised? Let him not be circumcised. Okay, and now we get the full picture of what this verse is saying. Remember what the debate was. Remember that Titus wasn't compelled to be circumcised. He was not figuratively drawn. He was not drawn into this debate. So if you are circumcised, don't be drawn by this debate. If you're uncircumcised, don't become circumcised. Why? Because of this debate. Don't become circumcised ever, but be like Titus, who was not compelled to be circumcised. Don't be drawn into the debate if you're already circumcised. Don't be like people who have been vaccinated to say, well, vaccine mandates, I'm all for them because I've been vaccinated. You've been circumcised, don't be drawn. If you've not been circumcised, don't be circumcised because of that debate. We always have to remember what Paul was contending with when we read his writings on circumcision, that he wasn't just saying don't become circumcised, he was saying don't become circumcised in order to be justified before Yahovah. If you do so, then Messiah is of no use to you. In Genesis 17:10-12, just to remind us what the scriptures say, which Paul does not have the authority to go against, even if you misunderstand him. It says, "This is my covenant which you guard between me and you, and your seed after you. Every male child among you is to be cut circumcised. And you shall cut off the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall become a sign of the covenant between me and you. And the son of 8 days is circumcised by you. Every male child in your generations, he who was born in your house or bought with silver from any foreigner is not yours, who is not of your seed, rather, must be circumcised." Does that count for us? We saw near the beginning, if you are Messiah, then you are the seed of Abraham and heirs according to the promise. We'll continue to look at circumcision in part 2. Leviticus 12 is where the instructions given to Abraham about circumcising children were encoded into law. It says, "And Yahovah spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, when a woman has conceived and has given birth to a male child, then she shall be unclean 7 days, as in the days of her monthly separation she is unclean. On the 8th day, the flesh of the foreskin, the olah, is cut." Okay, so this is what circumcision is. It's the foreskin being cut or cut off. And the 8th day is actually a day on which your body is best prepared to be circumcised, because you have prothrombin and vitamin K at their peak levels on the 8th day. They diminish after the 8th day, and those are necessary for clotting. So Yehovah knows what he's talking about. He knows the best time to do these things, and he tells us it must be on the 8th day, the day, of course, that we see Yeshua being circumcised. Now, this whole issue that Paul is dealing with the circumcision party, as they were known, who were saying you have to be circumcised and to keep the whole Torah of Moshe in order to be saved. Paul's retort to this, his riposte to this, is best given to us, or best written out in Romans 4. So if we read Romans 4, we'll see what was Paul's actual argument. We know he wasn't saying don't become circumcised. So when does Paul think you should become circumcised? Romans 4, 9-12 says, "Is this blessing upon the circumcised only, or upon the uncircumcised?" So there are those words, the word for circumcised and the word for uncircumcised. Epispato is not there. "For we affirm belief was reckoned unto Abraham for righteousness. How then was it reckoned, being in circumcision or in uncircumcision?" Not in circumcision, but in uncircumcision. So Paul's point here is, okay, you guys are saying you have to be circumcised in order to be saved. Well, what about Abraham? When was his belief reckoned to him as righteousness? Was it when he got circumcised? No, it wasn't. It was when he was uncircumcised. Yehovah saw his belief and he reckoned it to him as righteousness. And he received the sign of circumcision, a seal of the righteousness of the belief while in uncircumcision. So this is what circumcision is. It is a seal of the righteousness that we have by faith. We have that righteousness accredited to us because we have faith. Now that faith causes us to become circumcised and becomes a seal of that faith. It is a sign between us and Yehovah. It is the sign, in fact, of the Abrahamic covenant, that faith will be reckoned as righteousness. The sign of that covenant is circumcision. People go astray when they think that faith is something that you can just believe something and then that requires no action of you. Whereas the Bible teaches us that if you believe something, then you will act in obedience to it. You'll act in accordance with it. So Abraham had faith and he was saved by his faith. But because he had faith, when Yehovah said to him, "You and your seed after you, anyone that you buy into your household shall become circumcised," he did that because he believed Yehovah. For him to be a father of those believing through uncircumcision, and for righteousness to be reckoned to them also. So he is a father to everyone who believes, even though they're uncircumcised. He was their progenitor, so to speak. He's also the father of circumcision to those who not only are of the circumcision, but who also walk in the steps of the belief which our father Abraham had in uncircumcision. So the circumcision were those who were circumcised from birth, the Jews. Okay, it's longhand, if you like, for the Jews. He's not only the father of circumcision to those who are circumcised on the 8th day, but also to those who walk in the steps of the belief that he had. How do we walk in the steps of that belief as Abraham did? Well, of course, we become circumcised. And then Abraham is the father of circumcision to us also. So it's not only Jews that become circumcised, it's anybody who has the belief of Abraham. Galatians 5 verse 6 says, "For in Messiah Yeshua neither circumcision nor uncircumcision has any strength, but faith working through love." So it's not saying that circumcision is no good. It's saying the thing which is important about being circumcised is faith. Being circumcised without faith would not justify you, would not have you be saved. Being uncircumcised with faith is nothing, because that faith causes you to walk as Abraham did in the steps of Abraham and to become circumcised. It's the sign of the covenant by which you're saved. Of course, one would want to take that sign in their flesh. If your flesh is more important to you than the covenant, then that's a problem. That would mean that you're not only uncircumcised in flesh, but you are also uncircumcised in heart. To be uncircumcised in heart, or to be uncircumcised in ear, as we read in the scriptures, is to be stubborn against the word. To be circumcised in heart is what Abraham was. He wasn't only circumcised in his flesh. He was circumcised in his flesh because he was circumcised in heart. He had faith working through love, which rounds off what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7. He says, "Was anyone called while circumcised? Let him not be drawn. Was anyone called while uncircumcised? Let him not be circumcised. The circumcision is naught, and the uncircumcision is naught. But the guarding or the keeping or the cherishing of the commands of Elohim does matter." So if you're circumcised, but you don't cherish Yehovah's commands, your circumcision counts the same as uncircumcision would, which tells you that uncircumcision is not the state that is required of you. If you are uncircumcised, but you have the faith and you keep and you cherish the commands of Elohim, then you will become circumcised ultimately. So again, I can see why people read this and they say, circumcision is nothing, uncircumcision is nothing. So I'm going to choose to keep my foreskin. But they're not really understanding what Paul is actually saying. And if somebody in their ignorance thought that, then that would be a different matter to somebody who knows what he's saying, I'm not going to do it. Galatians 6 verse 15 says, "For in Messiah Yeshua, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision has any strength, but a new creature." So these are three different ways of saying the same thing. Circumcision, uncircumcision is unimportant. What matters is faith working through love. What matters is the guarding, keeping, the treasuring or cherishing of the commands of Elohim. What matters is being a new creature. Because if you've got any of those three things, you will become circumcised. If you're uncircumcised but you've got faith, then you walk in the steps of our father Abraham, who became circumcised as a seal of that belief which he had. Colossians 2:13 says, "You being dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh," which should tell us again that the uncircumcision of your flesh is equated here, or is on the same footing rather, as your trespasses. Previously, you were not in alignment with the word of Elohim. Okay, but now you've repented. Now you are a new creature. Now you keep the commands. Now you exhibit faith, working through love. Now you walk in the steps of Father Abraham. Romans 2:25-29 says, for circumcision indeed profits. Okay, it does. It profits. Why? If you practice the Torah. But if you are a transgressor of the Torah, your circumcision has become uncircumcision. So he's saying the same thing there. Okay, your circumcision is nothing if you're not a new creature. Your circumcision is nothing if you don't have faith working through love. Your circumcision is nothing if you forsake the commands of Elohim. But if you practice the Torah, circumcision does profit you, because it's a seal of the faith that you have. It's like, in Elohim's eyes, it's a stamp showing your faith. Like, this person has become circumcised by faith. If you become circumcised just to be justified, that's not something that Elohim is looking for. It continues and says, so if an uncircumcised one watches over the righteousnesses of the Torah, shall not his uncircumcision be reckoned as circumcision? Okay, so if you are uncircumcised and you keep the Torah, you follow it by faith, and then you were to die, does that mean that Yahovah wouldn't declare you right? Of course not. Your faith is as if you have already been circumcised. That doesn't mean that if you live your life, you don't become circumcised. It just means that the thing which matters is your faith. Faith causes you, like Abraham, to become circumcised. But if you were to die, would Elohim say, he's not circumcised, that's it? Of course not. That's not where Elohim's attention is. He's not looking for all the people in the world and saying, okay, circumcised, you can come in, uncircumcised, you can go out. He looks at the people in whatever state they are, circumcised or uncircumcised, and he says, where is your heart? Is your heart to guard my commands? Is your heart to walk in faith? Okay, I will justify you. Has nothing to do with whether or not you should become circumcised. And the uncircumcised by nature, who perfects the Torah, okay, so those who are not circumcised on the 8th day, shall judge you, who notwithstanding the letter and circumcision are a transgressor of the Torah. So your circumcision isn't going to save you if you transgress the Torah. For he is not a Jew who is so outwardly, neither is circumcision that which is outward in the flesh. But a Jew is he who is so inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart, in spirit, not in letter, whose praise is not from men, but from Elohim. So again, you can understand why people might read this and say, well, the circumcision which is outward in the flesh is not necessary. It's not what he's saying. He's saying that's not the thing that counts for you to be saved or for you to be justified. The thing that counts is whether you're circumcised in heart. And being circumcised in heart is not a new thing that those in Messiah have. It was always the case. Okay, in Deuteronomy 10, 12-16 we read, and now, Yisrael, what is Yehovah your Elohim asking of you? But to fear Yehovah your Elohim, to walk in all his ways, to love him, to serve Yehovah your Elohim with all your heart and with all your soul, to guard the commands of Yehovah and his laws which I command you today for your good. See, the heavens and the heaven of heavens belong to Yehovah your Elohim, and also the earth with all that is in it. Yehovah delighted only in your fathers to love them, and he chose their seed after them, you above all peoples as it is today. And you shall circumcise the foreskin of your heart, and harden your neck no more, which is what circumcision of the heart combats, which is the stiff neck. To circumcise the foreskin of your heart. Paul actually draws on the book of Deuteronomy very commonly in his writings, and we can see here it says, guard the commands of Yehovah and his laws. It's what Paul says when he says, circumcision, uncircumcision, not the focus. It is to guard the commands of Elohim. That's what is important. A lot of Paul's letters, as I say, are actually a retelling of what the Torah says to us. In Jeremiah 4 verse 4 it says, circumcise yourselves unto Yehovah. How? Take away the foreskins of your hearts, you men of Judah, inhabitants of Jerusalem, lest my wrath come forth like fire and burn with none to quench it because of your evil deeds. So all the way through Scripture, Israel are told to circumcise their hearts. It doesn't mean don't get circumcised in the flesh. It just means make sure that that is where your focus is. Jeremiah 6:10 says, to whom shall I speak and give warning so that they hear? Their ear here is uncircumcised. They are unable to listen. They're unable to hear and obey. Okay, that's if your ear is uncircumcised. If your heart is uncircumcised, then your heart is unable to be obedient. It says, the word of Yehovah is a reproach to them. They do not delight in it because their ear is uncircumcised. And we see uncircumcised heart and ears together in Acts 7. You stiff-necked and uncircumcised in heart and ears. You always resist the Holy Spirit, as your fathers did, you also do. Ezekiel 44 verse 9 says, thus said the Master Yehovah, no son of a foreigner, one who is uncircumcised in heart or uncircumcised in flesh, comes into my set-apart place. Even any son of a foreigner who is among the children of Israel. And that's in Ezekiel 44 verse 9, which speaks of the millennium. So in Acts 7 they were told, you're uncircumcised in heart as your fathers were. It's not a new thing. That's always been the case, that the disobedient have been referred to as being uncircumcised in heart. So we see, putting this all together, that one needs to be circumcised in heart, as Abraham was, so that one would listen to the word of Elohim and obey it. That one will believe the word of Elohim. We walk in the steps of our father Abraham, and we receive circumcision as a seal of the righteousness that we have by faith. Jeremiah 9:23-26 says, thus said Yehovah, let not the wise boast in his wisdom, let not the mighty boast in his might, nor let the rich boast in his riches. But let him who boasts boast of this, that he understands and knows me, that I am Yehovah, doing kindness, justice, and righteousness in the earth. For in these I delight, declares Yehovah. See, the days are coming, declares Yehovah, when I shall punish all circumcised with the uncircumcised. Mitzrayim, Egypt, and Judah, and Edom, and the children of Ammon, the Ammonites, and the Moabites, and all those trimmed on the edges who dwell in the wilderness. For all the Gentiles are uncircumcised, and all the house of Israel are uncircumcised in heart. We read again in reverse circumcision in Hellenistic Judaism. Although it is likely that Judeans inherited circumcision from other people groups, which is quite a statement. It's basically saying, although it's likely that the Bible is false, and this is an area where academia falls short. Okay, if it's a case of what can we understand from data, what does data show us, academia is quite good. However, when it comes to matters of the scriptures, anything to do with Yehovah, academia has almost like an inherent disdain for it. It's likely that Judeans inherited circumcision from other people groups. According to who? Why do you think it's likely? That's just the author of this. And you'll see through the rest of this that the thinking of the world, or the wisdom of the world, is very much present in this writing. This is what we need to be aware of. That when we come to the topic of circumcision, that we get our instruction about it from what Yehovah says in his word, and nothing from the world. In the wider Near East, Judean circumcision in the Hellenistic era had several distinct features. Uniquely Judite texts command the forced circumcision of all males while they are still infants. So you can see kind of the bias of this author here. The Judeans were practicing infant circumcision on all males in the infancy stage is distinct from any other circumcision practice in the wider Near East, yet it's likely that they inherited it from them. The means by which Judean circumcision gained its uniqueness is the subject of much debate. Well, the scriptures are clear as to where their practice gained its uniqueness. It's because it was commanded by Yehovah to Abraham. Of course, that's not what academia is going to present. I suppose that the evidence for that would be the evidence of faith, which equally would not be presenting evidence either way. But the bias here is clear. It's likely that they inherited it from the people groups around them, and there's much debate about why it's unique, given that it's likely that they inherited it from such a way. But you can see this idea of commanding the forced circumcision of all males while they were still infants. This thinking is becoming more and more prevalent, and regretfully, it is becoming prevalent amongst Torah keepers too. They've begun to follow after what the world has to say. I found an article by a Jewish man living in San Francisco, and that's quite telling in and of itself. San Francisco is quite a left-leaning sort of place, with kind of the extreme left. We see his thinking being changed by the wisdom of the world. He says, for several decades, opposition to circumcision has been building in the United States and within the American Jewish community. This year, the people of San Francisco will see on their ballots a proposed ordinance banning circumcision entirely, with no exception for religious Jews or Muslims. As others have written in these pages already, this measure is offensive and overbroad, and at least some of its proponents are clearly guilty of anti-Semitism. It is also, in my view, unconstitutional. Civil liberty groups and Jewish organizations have roundly condemned it, and the defeat seems likely. But San Francisco is a harbinger of things to come, and critiques of circumcision are not limited to the lunatic fringe. Opponents say that circumcision is a brutal, non-consensual mutilation of a child that results in a permanent loss of sensitivity. Our society doesn't allow parents to abuse their children, this argument runs. So why should we allow this particular form of violence, which is irrevocable and damaging? Proponents counter that circumcision reduces the risk of HIV transmission and of some STDs, that the mutilation in question is relatively minor, and that in the case of religious communities it is time-honored and religiously mandated. Personally, were it not for my Jewish heritage, I would never circumcise a child of my own. I do not have children, though my partner and I are considering it. There is no question that circumcision reduces sexual pleasure. Oh, I can tell you that that's not true, which I find philosophically repugnant. In fact, whether or not this was the original purpose of the mitzvah, the power of circumcision to reduce pleasure was well known to Jewish sages. Maimonides, for example, praises circumcision for that reason. In addition, it is an unnecessary form of surgery, and it is indeed permanent. Your son cannot change his mind about it later, even if he were to discontinue Jewish religious observance. So you see this article by this guy who he describes himself as religious. I would say that's probably true. He's religious rather than a man of faith. Maybe he would say that he had faith, but it's kind of that mental accedance to the existence of God rather than belief of the word. This man clearly doesn't believe the word as being good and from Elohim, and you can see that he's kind of slipped into agreeing with the world about circumcision, about things that are incorrect. So if that's where a Jewish man is, it should be no surprise to us that in the Christian church there's much opposition to it, and because people don't change, it should be no surprise to us that that thinking is also present in some people who profess to be the seed of Abraham, as this man does. You get propaganda such as this. When will I be protected from genital mutilation? It's all about the protection of children. The thing that I want to address now is this statue, because people will say that this statue shows that David, a Jewish man, was circumcised, being Jewish, but that this statue proves that you are only to remove the tip of the foreskin. This is some nonsense that's going around about this, that this shows a man with the tip cut off his foreskin. Actually, if you were to look at this statue, you would see that he is, in fact, uncircumcised. That should be no surprise to us. This was a statue done by Michelangelo. As I say, in Greek and Roman culture, an uncircumcised penis was a no-no. Okay, the exposing of the glands of the penis was a no-no. Another thing that you'll notice about this statue is that it has no beard. It is not that Michelangelo, a 26-year-old guy from Florence, has such amazing knowledge of David that he has done an anatomically correct statue. It's that he went with the aesthetic politics of the age that he made the statue of David, and so he made him beautiful in his own eyes. But we know that David had a beard. In 2 Samuel 10:4-5, it says, "So Hanun took David's servants, and shaved off half of their beards, and cut off their garments in the middle as far as their buttocks, and sent them away. And they informed David, and he sent to meet them, because the men were greatly ashamed. And the king said, 'Wait at Jericho until your beards have grown, and then return.'" So we see from this that the beard was something that if you didn't have, you would be ashamed. Again, that was an aesthetic of the time. But to say that Michelangelo made an anatomically correct statue of David without a beard is just patently incorrect. As I say, his penis is uncircumcised. It's not circumcised with only the tip removed. So if you hear that argument, now you know the truth. As we saw before, when 8 days were completed for him, Yeshua, to be circumcised, his name was called Yeshua. Okay, so Yeshua was circumcised. We know this as a historical fact, but to show you that the art of the time did not reflect the truth in Scripture, but rather the popular aesthetic. Here we have some images of Yeshua when he is clearly older than 8 days old, and you can see that he is not circumcised. So this is an artistic preference, artistic license, if you like, nothing to do with the truth of the Scriptures. If we go to epispasm, which was, we saw before, the cutting of the skin on the shaft of the penis and the pulling forward of it so that it formed a new foreskin. It says a simple surgical procedure called infibulation was another option for a defectively short foreskin. A surgeon would pierce the foreskin to receive a light wooden pin called the fibula. With the fibula inserted, the foreskin was held neatly closed. Infibulation was supposed to improve the voice and health of adolescent boys. But Celsus, the author of a medical text from the 1st century CE, doubts the therapeutic value of infibulation for this purpose. Infibulation could also be used by those who have been circumcised. Some circumcised Jews concealed their circumcision by drawing the skin around the penis forward and securing it with a fibula or with twine. Martial, the Roman poet, ridiculed an infibulated Jewish slave and derided another Jew whose fibula fell out at the bath. So again, in the baths, in the gymnasiums, Jews sought to cover up their circumcision because it was a social faux pas to be circumcised. More than that, in fact, it would make one the object of scorn and ridicule. That is why Michelangelo depicts David with an uncircumcised penis. Here we see the Hebrew and the Greek word for being uncircumcised or for foreskin. Here we see foreskin and uncircumcised here. Acrobustia, having the foreskin or uncircumcised. So to remove the foreskin is literally what it is to be circumcised. The removal of the tip is something that we see later on, and it's because of the wisdom of the world. It's not something that we should be pursuing. So it's unquestionable that an incision round the circumference, a circumcision, that removes the foreskin is what is required. In Joshua 5:2-3, we see, at that time Yehovah said to Yahushua, make knives of flint for yourself and circumcise the sons of Israel again the second time. This is something that you will hear people who say it's just the tip pointing to. You'll hear them say, see, you could be circumcised twice. But that's not true. As we saw before, the children of Israel were to be circumcised for Passover. And an uncircumcised foreigner couldn't eat the Passover meal. Here, for them to be circumcised a second time just means that the whole people group were circumcised. So Yahushua made knives of flint for himself and circumcised the sons of Israel at the hill of foreskins. So in order to make a hill of foreskins, can you imagine that being just the tip of the foreskin, forgetting the fact that it's a hill of foreskins, not a hill of tips? These arguments don't make any sense. All of the children of Israel were circumcised here. It was the second time that it happened, and their foreskin was removed. We look at the Greek word for circumcision. It is peritemno, means to cut around, i.e. to circumcise. Just like circumcision is an incision around the circumference, peritemno refers to cutting around the perimeter, if you like. If you understand what a foreskin is, then you know what is being asked of you. To think it is the tip of the foreskin is to misunderstand what is being commanded. Zipporah took a sharp stone. What did she do? She cut off the foreskin. It's simple. Again, all you need to really understand in this is what a foreskin is. If it said she cut off the tip of the foreskin, that would be different. So he let him go. Then she said, you are a bridegroom of blood because of the circumcision. The word there being mulah, because of the cutting. 1 Samuel 18:25-27 says, and Shaul said, say to David, the king has no delight in any payment or the bride, but 100 foreskins of the Philistines to take vengeance on the king's enemies. But Shaul intended to have David fall by the hand of the Philistines. And his servants declared these words to David, and it pleased David well to become the king's son-in-law, and the days had not expired. And David arose and went, he and his men, and smote 200 men of the Philistines, and David brought their foreskins. Okay, so what did he bring? Did he come with a handful of little tips? No, he brought their foreskins. Again, all you need to know is what a foreskin is in order to understand what is asked of you. Genesis 34:22-25 says, only on this condition would the men agree to dwell with us, to be one people. If every male among us is cut as they are cut, their herds and their possessions and all their beasts, should they not be ours? Only let us agree with them and let them dwell with us. And all who went out of the gate of his city listened to Hamor and Shechem, his son. Every male was circumcised or cut, all who went out the gate of his city. And it came to be on the third day, when they were in pain, that two of the sons of Yaakov, Shimon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword and came boldly upon the city and killed all the males. If you've ever had a nasty cut, then you can imagine what it would be like to have the tip of your foreskin removed. Ask yourself, would that prevent you from defending yourself if only two men were to come in and kill everyone in your camp. Or equally, put yourself in the situation of having your entire foreskin removed. Would that incapacitate you? I can tell you from the perspective of someone who has been circumcised, that 3 days after the operation, you would be in no position to be defending yourself. Not that it's so horrific, just that it's painful. It's painful to move around. You certainly wouldn't be having a sword fight with somebody. But if you're now in the position of recognizing that you need to be circumcised, don't worry that it's going to be so painful. If you have had a bad bruise, let's say, something that's painful if you were to prod it, then you can understand the sort of pain that you're talking about. It's not the same situation that they were in when they would need flint knives to cut off the foreskin without anesthetic. It's a very different case today. So don't be fearful. Don't be fearful of all these lies that are put out there by people like the people in San Francisco that Jewish man acceded to what they were talking about. It will not be a problem for you. If you draw close to Yehovah in such a way, he will draw close to you. In Joshua 5:7-9, it says, Joshua circumcised their sons, whom he raised up in their place, for they were uncircumcised, because they had not been circumcised on the way, when he circumcised the others. And it came to be, when they had completed circumcising all the nation, that they stayed in their places in the camp till they were healed. And Yehovah said to Yehoshua, today I have rolled away the reproach of Mitzrayim from you. So the name of the place is called Gilgal to this day. Interesting way for Yehovah to describe it. When they were circumcised, as having the reproach of Egypt removed from them. If we recognize that we have been freed from Egypt, that we have been freed from the world, then it's true of us that we have had what Yehovah sees as the reproach of Egypt, those who are uncircumcised, those who are not in covenant with him. He's removed that from us. In epispasm circumcision in reverse again, it says, both confirming that many Jews neglected circumcision and affirming the rabbinic commitment to it, the Talmud tells us that Jerusalem fell to the Romans and the temple was destroyed because Jews broke the covenant by failing to circumcise their sons. So we know that that is true. People back then did it just as people who say they're in covenant with Yehovah today break the covenant. Some Jews practiced the form of circumcision that did not show. So again, just as it was back then, we're seeing the same thing coming to be now. Don't be fooled by these lies. The reaction can be seen in the Mishnah's requirement that valid circumcision must bear the glands. So they even had to encode that in their oral law because people were falling for the same deception. The need for this ruling implies that some Jews practiced a form of circumcision, perhaps by simply nicking the foreskin in a way that did not bear the glands. Same thing today. Removing only a little of the foreskin might obviate the need for infibulation or epispasm. Jews who circumcised in this manner did not set out to abrogate the covenant of circumcision. They merely tried to keep the covenant without offending their Gentile neighbors by bearing the glands. And I'm sure that people today who are taken in by the wisdom of the world could see themselves as the same. Well, I don't want to do something that those people of the world won't understand. So I'm not going to do circumcision as it is required in the scriptures. What this reminds me of, kind of the image that it gives me, is people who think that they are hiding from Elohim. And they're saying, oh, I'm not abrogating your covenant, Elohim. I'm just doing it while also subscribing to the wisdom of the world. The image that this brings to mind is this: people who think that they're hidden but are not. Perhaps more accurately, this: people who think that they're hiding, but the mirror that the word is like shows who they truly are. Examine yourself and your reaction to the information that I've shared with you today, and ask yourself, do you seek to hide behind misunderstanding of Paul's verses or anything else to prevent you from becoming circumcised? Do you think that you are hiding from Elohim, that those things suffice to hide you from Elohim? And actually, the word shows where you're at in your heart. 2 Timothy 3:7-9 says, always learning and never able to come to a knowledge of the truth. And as Yochanan and Mamre opposed Moshe, so do these also oppose the truth, men of corrupt minds found worthless concerning the belief. Don't let this be true of you. And they shall not go on further, for their folly shall be obvious to all, even if they think that they're hiding, as also that of those men became. In Jude 10-11 we read, and these blaspheme that which they do not know, and that which they know naturally, like unreasoning beasts. In these they corrupt themselves. Woe to them, because they have gone in the way of Cain. They have gave themselves to the delusion of Balaam for a reward, and they've perished in the rebellion of Korach. Don't be corrupted by that which your flesh would choose. Walk after the Spirit. See the truth of the word and believe it. In 2 Timothy 4:3-4 it says, for there shall be a time when they shall not endure or bear sound teaching, but according to their own desires they shall heap up for themselves teachers tickling the ear. And they shall indeed turn their ears away from the truth and be turned aside to myths. So don't just listen to the ear ticklers who say, oh no, you don't have to be circumcised anymore. That was something for the past. Don't you worry about it. If you're a little worried about circumcision, don't worry about it. You don't have to do it. Don't listen to those people. Don't choose those people to receive instruction from. 1 Peter 2:7-10. This preciousness then is for you who believe. But to those who are disobedient, the stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone, and a stone of stumbling and a rock that makes for falling, who stumble because they are disobedient to the word, to which they also were appointed. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a set-apart nation, a people for a possession, that you should proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, who once were not a people, but now the people of Elohim, who would not obtain compassion, but now obtained compassion. So Peter's not specifically writing about Circumcision here, he's writing about faith, the preciousness which is for those who believe. Circumcision is a part of that. Okay? People stumble. Don't be as the disobedient who stumble because they are disobedient to the word. Okay? The preciousness that you have access to now, which includes circumcision, is for those who believe, those who will obtain compassion, those who are the people of Elohim. And the people who are disobedient, those who do not love Elohim, those who hate Elohim, the word tells us about them too. Psalm 81 verse 15 says, "Those who hate Yehovah feign obedience, and their time of punishment be forever." Don't be one who feigns obedience. Don't be deceived by your pretense of obedience. If you come to something in the word and it causes you to stumble, then don't delude yourself that you are still obedient. Recognize what the word asks of you. Confess your guilt before Yehovah. Be one who does this, one who shamas, that is to hear and obey. Be one who shamas, one who keeps, guards, cherishes, treasures. One who navats, as we saw a couple of weeks ago. It's the same thing as shemaing, but a term which refers to sight. Be one who yiraz, that is to fear Yehovah. Be one who kavads, that is to give weight to. Kavads, the word of Elohim. Don't be one who bazaz, the word, that is to lightly esteem, to count the word as light instead of weighty. Do not be one who halals the word, that is to profane the word. Do not be one who is ma'al, one who ma'als, that is to be unfaithful, as we saw a couple of weeks ago. Don't be one who lo nasaz, the word, does not accept or pay heed to the word. Be like Abraham. You shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall become a sign of the covenant between me and you. We'll come back in the third part. Okay, so in this part, as I said at the beginning, we're going to see just how short a Torah portion this actually is. I'm going to cover the rest of the text of the Torah portion, but it pretty much only comprises of a census, issues to do with the daughter of Zelophehad and Yehoshua being made leader. That's why I focused on the idea that we have at the beginning, that an everlasting covenant was made with Pinchas because of his zeal. And we have the opportunity to enter into the everlasting covenant made with Abraham if we are similarly zealous. Verse 14 says, "And the name of the Israelite who was killed with the Midianite woman, was Zimri, son of Salu, a leader of a father's house among the Shemonites. And the name of the Midianite woman who was killed was Cosbi, daughter of Sur. He was the head of the people of her father's house in Midian. And Yehovah spoke to Moshe, saying, Distress the Midianites, and you shall smite them. For they distressed you with their tricks, with which they deceived you, in the matter of Peor, in the matter of Cosbi, the daughter of a leader of Midian, their sister who was killed in the day of the plague because of Peor. And that is something that Charlie will look at next week in Bahar and Bachukte. In Numbers 26:1, it says, "And it came to be after the plague that Yehovah spoke to Moshe and Eleazar, son of Aharon the priest, saying, Take a census of all the congregation of Israel from 20 years old and above." So this is just like the census that was taken before we had this plague. And an interesting thing to do that you might wish to do in your own time is to look at the numbers in the tribes before and compare them with the numbers that we're going to look at here. By their fathers' houses, everyone going out to the army in Israel. We see that the people who die in the plagues are the people who were guilty. So if you compare the numbers, you can see which tribes were the worst offenders. So Moshe and Eleazar the priest spoke with them in the desert plains of Moab by the ordain of Jericho, saying, Take a census of the people from 20 years old and above, as Jehovah commanded Moshe, and the children of Israel who came out of the land of Mitzrayim. And I'm going to summarize this information for you here. The sons of Reuven, of Hanoch, of the family of the Hanochi, of Palu, the family of the Palui, of Chetron, the family of the Chetroni, of Carmi, the family of the Carmi, 43,730. And the son of Palu, Eliav, and the sons of Eliav, Nemuel, and Dathan, and Avram. This Dathan and Avram were the called ones of the congregation who contended against Moshe and against Aharon in the company of Korach when they contended against Yehovah. And the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up together with Korach when that company died, when the fire consumed 250 men, and they became a sign. But the sons of Korach did not die. In fact, they go on to write some of the Psalms. The sons of Shimon, according to their families, of Nemuel, the family of the Nemueli, of Yamin, the family of the Yamini, of Yachen, the family of the Yachni, of Zerach, the family of the Zachi, of Shaul, the family of the Shauli, 22,200 of them. The sons of Gad, according to their families, or their mishpacha, or their mishpachot, being the plural, of Zephon, the family of the Zephani, of Chagi, the family of the Chagi, of Shuni, the family of the Shuni, of Osni, the family of the Osni, of Avi, the family of the Avi, of Arad, the family of the Aradi. So, as we're going through this, these are the sons who were born to Jacob's son in Egypt. Of Areli, the family of the Areli, there were 40,500 in the tribe of Gad. The sons of Yehudah, Ea and Onan, and Ea and Onan died in the land of Canaan. You can read about that in Genesis 38. The sons of Yehudah, according to their families, of Shelah, the family of the Shelani, of Peretz, the family of the Partzi, Of Zerach, the family of the Zarchi. The sons of Peretz, of Chetzron, the family of the Chetzroni. Of Hamul, the family of the Hamuli. And there were 76,500 of the sons of Yehudah and their families. The sons of Yisachar, according to their families. Of Tola, the family of the Tolai. Of Puvah, the family of the Puni. Of Yashuv, the family of the Yashuvi. Of Shimron, the family of the Shimroni. 64,300 in the tribe of Issachar. The sons of Zebulun, according to their families. Of Sered, the family of the Sardi. Of Elon, the family of the Eloni. Of Yachlael, the family of the Yachlaeli. 60,500 in Zebulun. The sons of Yosef, according to their families, by Manasseh and Ephraim, the two sons of Yosef. They were divided into a tribe each when Jacob adopted them. The sons of Manasseh, of Machir, the family of the Machiri. And Machir brought forth Gilad. Of Gilad, the family of the Giladi. These are the sons of Gilad. Of Yetzer, the family of the Yetzeri. Of Chelek, the family of the Cheoki. Of Azriel, the family of the Azrieli. Of Shechem, the family of the Shikmi. Of Shemidah, the family of the Shemidai. Of Hefer, the family of the Hefri. And Zelophehad, son of Hefer, had no sons but daughters. And the names of the daughters of Zelophehad, Machlah and Noah, not Noach, Choglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. There were 52,700 in Manasseh. The sons of Ephraim, according to their families, of Shuthalach, the family of the Shuthalchi. Of Becher, the family of the Bachri. Of Tachan, the family of the Tachani. The sons of Shuthalach. Of Aran, the family of the Arani. 32,500 in Ephraim. The sons of Benjamin, according to their families. Of Bela, the family of the Bali. Of Ashbel, the family of the Ashbeli. Of Achiram, the family of the Achrami. Of the Shufam, the family of the Shufami. Of Chufam, the family of the Chufami. The sons of Bela were Ard and Naaman. Of Ard, the family of the Ardi. Of Naaman, the family of the Naami. 45,600. The sons of Dan, according to their families. The sons of Shucham, the family of the Shuchami. 64,400 in Dan. Not many families, but a lot of people. The sons of Asher, according to their families. Of Yimnah, the family of the Yimnah. Of Yishvi, the family of the Yishbi. Or Yishbi, the family of the Yishbi. Of Bere'ah, the family of the Bere'i. Of the sons of Bere'ah. Of Chevre, the family of the Chevri. Of Malkiel, this family of the Malkieli. The name of the daughter of Asher was Serach. And there were 53,400 in Asher. These are the registered ones of the children of Israel, 1,730. And Yehovah spoke to Moshe, saying, the land is to be divided to these as an inheritance according to the number of names. To the large one you give a larger inheritance, and to the small one you give a smaller inheritance. Each shall be given its inheritance according to their registered ones, so the ones who were counted in the census. But the land is divided by lot. They inherit according to the names of the tribes of their fathers. And if you want to pause the video, that is the division of the land, which we see in Joshua's time. And these are the registered ones of the Levi, according to their families, of Gershon, the family of the Gershoni, of Kehath, the family of the Kohathi, of Merari, the family, or Merari, the family of the Merari. These are the families of the Levi, the families of Livni, the family of the Hebroni, the family of Machli, the family of the Mushi, the family of the Korhi, and Kehath brought forth Amram, who was the father of Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. And the name of Amram's wife was Jochebed, the daughter of Levi, who was born to Levi in Mitzrayim. And to Amram she bore Aharon and Moshe and their sister Miriam. And to Aharon were born Nadav and Abihu, Eleazar and Ithamar. And Nadav and Abihu died when they brought strange fire before Yehovah. And their registered ones were 23,000, every male from a chodesh old and above, for they were not registered among the other children of Israel, because there was no inheritance given to them among the children of Israel. These are the ones registered by Moshe and Eleazar the priest, who registered the sons of Israel in the desert plains of Moab by the Jordan of Jericho. But among these there was not a man of those registered by Moshe and Aharon the priest, when they registered the sons of Israel in the wilderness of Sinai. For Yehovah had said of them, they shall certainly die in the wilderness, and not a man was left of them, except Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and Yehoshua, son of Nun. So among them there was nobody of the first generation who were 20 years old and above. Now we see the daughters of Zelophehad, and we'll see what their issue is. Then came the daughters of Zelophehad, son of Chepher, son of Gilad, son of Machir, son of Manasseh, from the families of Manasseh, son of Yosef. And these were the names of his daughters, Machlah, Noah, and Hoglah, and Milcah, and Tirzah. And they stood before Moshe and before Eleazar the priest, and before the leaders and all the congregation by the door of the tent of meeting, saying, Our father died in the wilderness, yet he was not in the company of those who met together against Yehovah in company with Korach, but he died in his own sin, and they had no sons. Why should the name of our father be removed from among his family, because he had no son? Give us a possession among the brothers of our father. Moshe then brought their case before Yehovah. So, as I said, it was the paternal line which was important. So the males, these daughters come and say, look, we are all sisters. Our father gave us no brother, why is it that his name should be forgotten, that he shouldn't receive an inheritance? And Moshe takes that to Yehovah to see what he says. And Yehovah spoke to Moshe, saying, the daughters of Zelophehad speak what is right. You should certainly give them a possession of inheritance among their father's brothers, and cause the inheritance of their father to pass to them. And speak to the children of Israel, saying, when a man dies and has no son, then you shall cause his inheritance to pass to his daughter. And if he has no daughter, then you shall give his inheritance to his brothers. And if he has no brothers, then you shall give his inheritance to his father's brothers. And if his father has no brothers, then you shall give his inheritance to the nearest relative in his family, who would have been the daughters of Zelophehad, and he shall possess it. And it shall be to the children of Israel for a law of mishpat, as Yehovah commanded Moshe. And Yehovah said to Moshe, go up into this Mount Avarim, and see the land which I have given to the children of Israel. And when you have seen it, you also shall be gathered to your people as Aharon your brother was gathered. Because you rebelled against my mouth in the wilderness of sin, in the strife of the congregation, to set me apart at the waters before their eyes. These were the waters of Meribah at Kadesh in the wilderness of Sin. And we saw about that a couple of weeks ago. And Moshe spoke to Yehovah, saying, let Yehovah, the Elohim of the spirits of all flesh, appoint a man over the congregation, who goes out before them and comes in before them, who leads them out and brings them in, so that the congregation of Yehovah be not like sheep without a shepherd. Atonement was made for the children of Israel on these occasions, okay? So the rest of what we see in the Torah portion is to do with various sacrifices, or a lot of it is. So I just want to look at when atonement was made. Sacrifices being given would make atonement for the people. So atonement was made for the people every morning and every evening. Remember what atonement is? It's like a covering of cleanliness over the people. They all had to attend to their own flesh to make sure that they were not unclean, but atonement for all the people was made in the morning and evening. It's also made each Sabbath. It was also made at the beginning of each Chodesh, the first day of the Chodesh. Atonement will be made. On each of the 7 days of unleavened bread, including first fruits if it was within unleavened bread. On Shavuot, on the day of trumpets, on Yom Kippur, and on each day of Sukkot, including the 8th day. Okay, animal sacrifices were required on each one of those occasions. A lot of the instructions for these things aren't things that we can do, because they are all to do with making atonement for Israel when they had Yehovah dwelling in their midst. And Yehovah said to Moshe, take Yahushua son of Nun with you, a man in whom is the Spirit, and you shall lay your hand on him, and shall set him before Eleazar the priest, and before all the congregation, and give him charge before their eyes, and shall put some of your esteem on him, so that the congregation of the children of Israel obey him. And he is to stand before Eleazar the priest, who shall inquire before Yehovah for him by the justice, the mishpat of the Urim. At his word they go out, and at his word they come in. Both he and all the children of Israel with him, all the congregation. So Moshe and Aaron die, and they are followed by Joshua and Eleazar. And Moshe did as Yehovah commanded him, and took Yehoshua and set him before Eleazar the priest and before all the congregation, and laid hands on him and gave him a charge as Yehovah commanded by the hand of Moshe. And the subject of Joshua is very interesting. The book of Joshua is very interesting, and I would contend that it is actually the end of the Torah. It's certainly the end of the narrative. If you are interested in that, why would you say it was the end of the Torah, for example? And you're interested in the book of Joshua, I would point you to our website. If you go to the tab at the top, Torah portions, you'll be led to this screen, Torah portions by Parsha. And as you can see, a couple of years ago, we actually covered the book of Joshua. So I would recommend that you watch those Torah portions, because I think they have a lot to offer, especially since Yehoshua is a picture of Yeshua, even taking the name Yeshua at the end of his life. Should we pray? Father, I thank you for the sign of the covenant, that we can actually take a sign in our flesh that shows that we are yours. Thank you that you've allowed us to circumcise our hearts in accordance with your word, that you allow us to come back to you when we have strayed from the good way. Thank you for your word. Thank you that we get to study it. Thank you that we went through the book of Joshua and learned what we did from that. Thank you that we can come to this place and meet in your name, and pray that you would ever reveal more and more of your name to us so that we can walk in a way that is pleasing to you. Thank you, Father. Amen.